I know you. I know what you were, what you are. People don't change. You're Slippin' Jimmy.
This is part of the conversation between Jimmy and Chuck McGill, in which Jimmy realizes it was Chuck, not Howard, who had been working against him.
He'll never change. He'll never change. Ever since he was 9. Always the same. Couldn't keep his hands out of the cash drawer.
This is from one of the climactic moments of the entire show, when Jimmy tricks Chuck into melting down during Jimmy's bar hearing.
If you're not going to change your behavior, and you won't, why not just skip the whole exercise? In the end, you're going to hurt everyone around you.
And this is from the final conversation that Jimmy and Chuck will ever have. These infamous words by Chuck McGill highlight Jimmy's internal struggle and hit both Jimmy and the audience where it hurts. We desperately want Jimmy to prove Chuck wrong, for Chuck to see what we see, a good, hard-working man struggling against a world that is seemingly out to get him. Yet, Jimmy proves him right, time and time again. But what is it about Jimmy that made Chuck feel like he needed to work so hard to keep him out of the law? After all, Chuck frequently says that Jimmy has a good heart, and it's easy to see that he's highly intelligent. So what made Slippin' Jimmy so dangerous? For Chuck, Slippin' Jimmy is someone who avoids doing the hard thing and instead takes shortcuts and avoids dealing with his problems. Chuck knows firsthand how Slippin' Jimmy can leave a path of destruction in his wake. As children, when Jimmy wanted money, he would steal small amounts from his dad. Not enough that he should miss it, but their father's business went under. Chuck wants Jimmy to change. He needs Jimmy to change. But he doesn't believe it is possible. Thus, the central question of Better Call Saul came into being. Could Slippin' Jimmy change, or would he continue to slip and fall, taking everyone else down with him? On the surface, Slippin' Jimmy is the part of Jimmy McGill that uses his considerable talents to con people and get what he wants. And Slippin' Jimmy always gets what he wants. There's seemingly nothing he can't achieve when he puts his mind to it, and watching him do his thing is one of the show's main sources of excitement. Still, there's more to it. Co-creators Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould use these cons to show how Jimmy wields his talents to avoid dealing with truly difficult situations. Situations that would require a great amount of time and effort to solve. One way we see this play out throughout the show's run is when Jimmy uses cons as a distraction to avoid confronting his emotions. The first major example of this is in Season 1, after he learns that Chuck has secretly been working to keep him from advancing as a lawyer. Instead of facing his feelings, he immediately runs back to his hometown of Cicero. There, he runs small-time cons with his old friend Marco. The two spend a week partying and tricking drunk men into giving them whatever cash is in their wallets. It's the perfect distraction for Jimmy. But before long, he has to return to his life in Albuquerque. The next time we see him, he's doing the same thing, but in Albuquerque. Still reeling from his revelation about Chuck, and now at a crossroads in his career, he escapes reality by scamming a hotel to use their pool and get free drinks.
I just finally decided to be me.
Everything okay, Mr. Compton? Would you like another drink?
Kim comes to confront him and to pull him back to the real world, but he convinces her to help him scam a rich jerk into buying them thousands of dollars worth of shots. This is the first time he pulls her into his attempts to evade his issues. The other way in which Jimmy avoids facing his difficulties is by taking shortcuts. Most of Slippin' Jimmy's cons fall into this category. Gilligan and Gould seem to find this aspect of Jimmy so important that they centered much of the pilot around the idea. When we first meet Jimmy, he's stuck doing low-paying and demeaning public defender work. He desperately wants to find a case that pays well and could give him the type of publicity to jumpstart his business. He decides that he can't wait for this to happen naturally. So he gets a meeting with the Kettlemans, a husband and wife who defrauded the city for more than $1 million, but the Kettlemans decide to go with Chuck's firm, HHM. Jimmy hopes to win them back by convincing some local small-time con men to jump in front of Betsy Kettleman's car and extort her. Jimmy would then jump out and save the day, and Betsy would hire Jimmy as her lawyer. That's the plan, at least. This is what Slippin' Jimmy does. He wants good, cheap publicity. He stages a disaster in front of a film crew so he can look like a hero. He wants a class action lawsuit settled so he can get his cut. He tricks his elderly clients into settling through manipulation. He wants the woman he loves to get the client that he feels she deserves. He alters official documents to make his brother and HHM look bad. All of these goals were attainable through hard work and dedication, but Jimmy needs them done now. In Slippin' Jimmy, always gets what he wants. From the first time Chuck appears on screen, this is the heart of the conflict between him and Jimmy. The brothers get into a rather heated argument about Chuck cashing out his share at HHM. During the argument, two main points of contention come up. The first is that Jimmy wants Chuck to cash out because Chuck's share of the firm is worth millions of dollars. But Chuck wants to beat his illness and get back to work. But Jimmy wants the money and wants to stick it to Howard Hamlin, so he needs Chuck to cash out. Jimmy wants the fast money and to get one over on Howard, while Chuck wants to do what he feels is right and slowly work his way back to helping the firm. The other point of contention is Jimmy's work as a public defender. Jimmy is frustrated that the pay is so small and that the work is so insignificant. But Chuck insists that the work itself is the point, and it'll lead to better things. This is one of the main reasons why the brothers can never see eye to eye. Chuck believes that there is an objectively right way to get to where you want to go in life, and Jimmy only cares about his destination. It doesn't matter if he has to make his own path. This pattern of avoidance and taking shortcuts is a key aspect of Jimmy's personality, and throughout the show's run, his behavior escalates. This is worsened by the fact that Chuck ends his own life, in large part because of something that Jimmy did. After Chuck's suicide, Jimmy takes his avoidance to a whole new level. What began as running away to Cicero and sipping martinis at hotels turns into full-scale denial and refusal to relax for even a second, or else risking thinking about what he did to Chuck. At the end of season 4, he seems to have an emotional breakthrough regarding Chuck.
If you decide and I get to be a lawyer, I'll do everything in my power to be worthy of the name McGill.
Kim watches this and beams with pride. She realizes that he's finally allowed himself to face the truth. And then...
Oh, and sweetheart, I'm gonna need one more form. DBA, because I'm not gonna be practicing under the name McGill, so.
Shouldn't be a problem. Just down the hall, we have all the forms.
Great.
Wait, Jimmy, what?
It's all good, man.
He only used his emotions to manipulate the bar association. He didn't truly confront them. Saul can't bear to live with the name McGill, serving as a constant reminder of his past. Unfortunately, as his desire to avoid emotions escalates, so too does his need to skip steps. In the early seasons, his cons very rarely had an intentional victim, and if it did, the damage was usually minimal. But he ends up reaching the point where he's blackmailing major corporations and turning his elderly clients against each other for money. Jimmy's life was never easy. He routinely digs himself into holes in which his only way out would involve long, difficult journeys, both in the real world and mentally. Instead of choosing to pull himself out, he continues to dig. He continues to look for shortcuts and avoid his issues. The problem is, Slippin' Jimmy didn't only hurt Jimmy McGill. Like Chuck said, he hurt everyone around him. The creators make it a point to highlight this fact from episode 1. I mentioned earlier the scam he was pulling on the Kettlemans to be their lawyer. Well, that ended up with the twin brothers nearly getting murdered at the hands of Tuco. This pattern continued for seasons as innocent people got hurt simply for being around while Slippin' Jimmy was executing a plan. This continued until Kim and Jimmy's biggest mistake, leading to the end of Jimmy McGill. Everything I've talked about so far has been before the emergence of Saul Goodman in the Breaking Bad timeline. This is because, while Jimmy uses cons as a coping mechanism, the entire Saul Goodman persona itself was a coping mechanism. After the deaths of Chuck and Howard, paired with Kim leaving, there could be no more Jimmy McGill. It would be too painful, too hard to exist as Jimmy. And we know that he could never face what was difficult. He needed to find ways around it. Thus, Saul Goodman was born. He was originally created so he could stop thinking about Chuck, and he stayed around to stop thinking about everything. Well, everything but money and success. The first time we see Saul Goodman in the Breaking Bad timeline, we get a glimpse of his life. His house suggests that his life is colorful and extravagant, but empty and devoid of emotion. Saul plays the character of douchebag lawyer, and he never stops. From the minute he wakes up to the minute he goes to sleep. He's distracting himself with work, distracting himself from thinking about the life that he ruined. Jimmy McGill from season 1 was a man who, despite working around the clock for little money while living in a closet, buys his brother supplies and delivers them to him daily. He was a man who had the opportunity to steal $1.4 million from the Kettlemans, and no one would have ever known, but instead, he used it to help them. Jimmy McGill in Season 1 was someone who couldn't help but do the right thing. He had a conscience, but he needed to turn that off or feel the pain. That's how he ended up in that classroom with Walter White. He didn't need the money, but to stop and reflect on whether working with Walter was the right thing to do would mean reflecting on so much more. So he played the character of the money-hungry lawyer to avoid the pain. In doing so, he brought real pain onto others. When forced to go on the run and become Gene Takovic, he loses everything that once made him happy, hence the switch to black and white. Living in a world devoid of color and human connection, if there was ever a time for Jimmy McGill to re-emerge and reflect on his mistakes, to accept the damage he's done, this was it. Instead, he decides to distract himself with work during the day and by reliving his past at night. But not his past as Jimmy, his past as Saul. Every day. The same routine. All to hide from his mistakes. He still can't admit who he really is. He still needs to avoid the pain. Once Jeffy is introduced into Gene's world, his behavior escalates. He needs to deal with the potential threat of Jeffy ratting him out. He considers paying to disappear again, but he decides to put the mantle of slipping Jimmy back on and find a shortcut to solve his issues. And this time, his shortcut comes with a side of avoidance. He makes the plan unnecessarily complicated to give him one last elaborate con to distract himself. His plan works, but it reawakens a piece of him that had been dormant since becoming Gene, a piece that had been long buried. This inspires him to call Kim. When she tells him to turn himself in, it cuts deep. He'd spent years trying to avoid thinking about Kim and what she may think of him, and when he finally gives in and reaches out to her, she condemns his actions and doesn't exactly give him a warm reception. In response, he tells Kim that she should turn herself in, and she knows that he's right. You can see it in her face. So that's what she does. Jane's response to the phone call is predictably poor. The weight of all of it is too much for him to bury in his mind. Kim seemingly doesn't want to talk to him. Her judgment, which deep down he knows is right, eats away at him. Going back to being Gene the Cinnabon manager won't cut it. The downtime and mundanity would force him to confront everything that he'd been feeling for years. So he digs in deeper. He starts pulling cons, but this time, unlike anything we've seen him do before. There's little pretense of it being for good or having limits. He drugs people, breaks into their homes, and steals their identities. And even when the plan goes wrong and the choice is to move on or risk getting caught, he takes the risk, because he can't stop to think for a second. That decision eventually leads to the capture of Saul Goodman. Now it seems to finally be over. There's nothing left that Gene can do. He will finally have to face the music. But then he remembers that he's Slippin' Jimmy, and Slippin' Jimmy always gets what he wants. He uses the government's abundance of evidence against him to argue that he was coerced by Walter White. He manages to get his potential sentence down to 7 years. This is peak Slippin' Jimmy, taking one final shortcut to avoid ever truly facing any internal or external consequences. But then,
sounds like you and your ex aren't talking on a regular basis.
Kim Wexler walked into the Albuquerque DA's office last month. She spilled her guts about Howard Hamlin.
She heard what he told her, and she decided to do what was right, despite the consequences that may follow. Gene goes to court under the name Saul Goodman, ready to explain to the judge why 7 years is the right sentence, ready to prove Chuck right once and for all and show the world that Slippin' Jimmy never changes. But he doesn't. Instead, he owns up to all of his mistakes, not just his crimes, but what he did to his brother.
He was an incredible lawyer. He's the most brilliant guy I ever met, but he was limited. I tried. I could have tried harder.
With Kim watching, he finally has the breakthrough that is long overdue. No more lies, no more shortcuts, and no more hiding. He does the hard thing when the easy out is right there. He tells the judge his name is James McGill, and he's finally willing to accept all the baggage that comes with it. And all it took was someone he loves to remind him who he used to be and show him who he could become. Chuck always believed that his brother couldn't change. That's how he justified undermining him at every turn. But in the end, Chuck was wrong. Slippin' Jimmy could never face his problems head on, instead preferring shortcuts. Saul Goodman was a persona built on a lie that was doomed to fall apart. And Gene Takovic was grasping on to what little of that lie was left to try to find some color in a colorless world. A world in which James McGill still lives, and in a prison he built for himself. But by finally embracing his mistakes and failures, James McGill lit a spark that might lead to new light.